They didn't stop at the protest, and they didn't stop at the clinic. They followed phones home, and no one knew they were doing it. This isn't fiction. It's real tech being used by real cops right now. I'm Jeff Hampton, the People's Lawyer, and in this video, I'm going to break down number one, how easy it is for police and private companies to trace where you've been, who you were with, and what you were doing. Number two, how this surveillance system actually works. And number three, what you can do today to stop cops from turning your phone into a silent informant. Imagine your smartphone doubling as a homing beacon for the police. With just a few clicks, cops can actually draw a digital fence around any location and scoop up all the cell phone information from any cell phone that crossed through that area. They don't have to just cast one fence either. They can actually draw multiple fences around all different types of areas and even follow your phone all the way to your house. All of this happens without your knowledge, without any warrant whatsoever, and it's all taking place through technology known as Fog Reveal. Fog Reveal is a surveillance software service sold to law enforcement that leverages the location data continuously harvested from our mobile apps. It will actually enable police to perform what's known as, quote, geofencing, drawing a virtual boundary on a map and identifying every device that was within that area during a specified time window. In other words, it flips the typical investigation on its head. Instead of starting with a suspect and tracking down their movements, cops now start with a time and location, and they track everybody who happened to be in the area. This, of course, means innocent people's data is routinely caught up in criminal investigations, and innocent people end up being arrested and charged. As one former police analyst who actually quit in protest over cops using Fog Reveal, he said, and I quote, "The tool's ability to bring up just about anybody in an area, whether they were in public or at home, seemed to me to be a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment." So this brings us to the question, what exactly is geofencing? At its core, geofencing is a technique that defines a geographic area in the digital realm, literally drawing a fence on a map, and then queries location data to find devices, usually smartphones, that were within that area during a certain time frame. It is considered a where and when search. In other words, show me all the devices that were in this location at this time. Now, geofencing isn't just a police tool, it's also a marketing tool to send you push notifications when you walk into a local store. But in the hands of law enforcement, it is a powerful form of reverse search. Essentially, all in the name of trying to track down one person, thousands, sometimes millions of people's private data is compromised by the police. You say, well, wait a minute, Jeff, what about warrants here? Well, traditional warrants are supposed to be specific about a particular person, about particular supporting evidence to establish probable cause, why that evidence should be seized or searched. But geofencing searches actually flip the script. Rather than going after a particular suspect supported by some evidence of a crime, now they just draw a line around a particular area and they treat everybody who was in the area as a suspect, even though they have no evidence that they committed a crime. In other words, it's surveillance first, investigation later, and who cares about the presumption of innocence? To illustrate, imagine a burglary happens overnight at a residence. With a geofence, police can request or directly gather data on every device that was in that neighborhood during the night. If your phone was on and you rode your bike past the area, congratulations, you are now on a list of persons of interest purely because of your location, not because of any actual evidence against you. Think that was just a hypothetical? Unfortunately, it actually really happened. In Gainesville, Florida, an avid cyclist by the name of Zachary McCoy found himself to be a suspect in a burglary charge. Police, obtaining a geofence warrant, obtained evidence of anyone and everyone who had been near that location at the time of the incident. Now, McCoy had done nothing wrong. He simply biked past the area, which he did almost every single day, but that was enough for Google to identify him and share his information with the cops. Google then notified McCoy that police demanded his location data, giving him just 7 days to object. Ultimately, McCoy had to spend thousands of dollars on an attorney to block the warrant, a luxury most people just don't have. In another case, Jorge Molina of Arizona wasn't quite so lucky. He was wrongfully arrested for murder when a broad geofence search placed him, according to the authorities, without a doubt at the scene of the incident. Here's what's crazy. Jorge not only had an alibi, but he had proof that the data they were relying upon was actually unreliable. At one point, he was able to show his account in multiple places at the same time. But yet the police, they still jailed him for 6 days, trying to claim he was the actual lead suspect in the murder charge. To make matters worse, police blasted his photo all over the place to media, and as a result of that, he lost his job, he lost his car, all of his finances, all because of this technology. This is why geofencing is so controversial. It's essentially a digital dragnet. Police defend it by saying, if you've got nothing to hide, then you've got nothing to fear. But being innocent, that didn't spare McCoy or Molina from their run-in with the cops. Oh, and those geofence warrants that I mentioned a moment ago where a judge is supposed to be involved, when it comes to fog reveal, they more often than not will even skip that step. Fog Reveal is a product of a company called Fog Data Science, founded by former Homeland Security officials in 2016. It's essentially geofencing on steroids. It's offered as a subscription service to law enforcement agencies, and here's the key. They sell it as a way to avoid obtaining a warrant. In Fog's own marketing pitch, it's, quote, mass surveillance on a budget for cops. For a fee in the ballpark of $7,500 to $10,000 per year, a police department gains access to a web-based portal known as fogreveal.com that allows officers to run unlimited location searches across a vast data set of phone location signals. Now, Fog's data repository is staggering. According to company materials, it tracks over 250 million devices, processing some 15 billion location signals a day, amounting to trillions of data points per year. In effect, Fog admits they have a historical log of many of us, most of us, our movements over the last several years. In fact, emails from Fog representatives were boasting, they were bragging how they had been tracking people dating all the way back to 2017. But how exactly does Fog gain access to this data? Quite simply, from the apps you install on your own phone. You've probably noticed many of your phone apps asking for your specific location. What about your Google Maps, your weather apps, maybe your coffee app, maybe a coupon app, or anything else that wants to help provide you extra data for your app? The hidden secret most people don't know is these apps collect your data and sell them to third-party data brokers. Fog Data Science essentially buys huge quantities of that commercially available location data, largely from a broker by the name of Ventel, which then aggregates this mobile app data. Whenever an application with a tracking SDK known as a software development kit is running on your phone, and you've given it location permissions, your phone's precise location, latitude and longitude, and a timestamp can then be recorded and sent off to the broker, tagged with a unique identifier for your device. Now, this identifier used is actually known as a mobile advertising ID, and even though it doesn't include your name, it is unique to your specific device. And the part most people don't know is that it continues to track you, and it's unique, and it's monitoring what you're doing until you reset your device. But here's what's key. The Fog Reveal data portal allows cops to actually search your specific data in two particular ways. Number one, area search, better known as geofencing. The officer can basically draw one or more shapes on a Google Earth map and specify a specific time range. Fog will then return a list of all the mobile device signals seen in that area during the time. Each result includes the device's identifier, the time, and the coordinates. The results will then appear as a red dot on the map so that investigators can actually visualize all the pings. The geographic range that's allowed to be searched here is huge. Literally, it can be up to 12 miles wide. That means Fog, as well as the cops, can actually look at millions of people's cell phones to find out of exactly where they are, where they're going, how long they were there, and here's what's crazy, it actually can date back to that particular phone's history up to 180 days. But in addition to geofence searches, cops can also use Fog Reveal to do a device search. If police have a particular device ID of interest, they can actually plug that ID into Fog's portal and retrieve the device's location history over a particular specified area. In fact, Fog advertises this as providing a person's pattern of life, the places they routinely go, the addresses where the device beds down at night, which is more likely where they live, and the place that it's at during the day, literally their work life, and other frequented spots. In other words, once cops have a device ID, they can work with Fog to literally create and follow the breadcrumbs of that person's history and everything they've done in their life all the way back to 6 months into the past. By working with Fog Reveal to gain access to these tools, cops now can achieve in mere moments what it took them months to achieve, all without having to actually be monitored or have any accountability. Now it's time for me to show you exactly how deep this web goes and exactly how cops can exploit this system. Let's say a crime takes place. Officers could turn around and run a Fog area search around a crime scene to get a list of phones that were present. Then they might filter or pick a few that seem suspicious, maybe a device that was there at 2 a.m. when the crime occurred. Then, using a device search, they can track those suspects to see where they live and maybe run another area search around one suspect's home's address to see if that same device was also present at some other crime scenes in the past. Alternatively, they can input multiple locations into one area search to find devices that show up in both locations. This could reveal, let's say, a single phone that was at location A when one crime happened and also at location B when another crime happened. Fog even brags that you can search multiple geofenced areas so that there's never any gap. You can overlap all of your searches. It's not hard to see how cops could use this to identify other people's associates, identify maybe places of worship they attended or protests they decided to attend. Now you say, come on, Jeff, stop for a minute. Is it really all that bad? I mean, after all, Fog's founders say this is a revolutionary crime-fighting tool that will forever make us safer. But to me, all I see is a private sector mass surveillance database that is being handed over to cops to allow them to search at will and most of the time avoid the need for a search warrant, which is one of the protections all of us have under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. If you don't believe me, listen to Fog in their own words. In fact, in Fog's own materials uncovered by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the company boasted to police that its service can provide 1, verifiable presence at a location on a specific date and time. Number 2, likely locations for residences, places of business, and frequent activities. Number 3, links to other individuals, places, and devices. And number 4, patterns of activity correlating to certain events, times, or alibis. To me, what Fog is actually saying is, they're saying, number 1, we can put a person at a scene. Number 2, we can figure out where they live and where they work. Number 3, we can see who they hang out with. And number 4, we can chart their activity over time for anything we find interesting. Now, if that's not a mass surveillance police state where private companies work hand in hand with cops, I don't know what is. Which brings me to the case many of you should be asking right now, which is how often are cops actually using this? Is this just big federal cases? Or are the small town cops using it too? Records obtained through public requests show that by 2022, Fog had contracts with at least 18 state and local law enforcement agencies, many of them small sheriff's offices and police departments, plus many others that tried free trials of the product. Now, the company actually deliberately markets their services to smaller police agencies at a lower fee, and they promise them literally a mass surveillance tool in order to help stop crime in their area. For example, rural Rockingham County, North Carolina, a population of about 91,000, subscribed to Fog Reveal for about $9,000 a year, and they eagerly renewed it. What about the California Highway Patrol? They paid $7,500 a year for access, plus an extra $2,400 to increase their query limit, indicating a heavier anticipated use. But it doesn't stop there. Suburban police, state narcotics bureaus, highway patrols, all are stepping in to get a bite of this because they all want to be able to mass surveil all of us. Meanwhile, Fog's data partner Vintel was supplying data location history to all the federal agencies that have 3 letters in them: ICE, FBI, you name it. All of these agencies were already being provided this information. In fact, an Inspector General investigation revealed that Vintel's information was being used to track people without a warrant all over the country. Even though it's rarely mentioned in court records, police are using it everywhere. In fact, police departments have used Fog in many investigations, from tracking a potential January 6th Capitol rioter to help solving the murder of a nurse in Arkansas, to also investigating a high-profile murder of an exotic snake breeder in Missouri. Yet these uses often never surface in the court proceedings or public records. I have to ask why. Well, here's the most likely reason why we never know about Fog's data being used. Essentially, when Fog generates a lead, police will then try to obtain the same information through a more conventional, court-approved method, like getting a warrant for that person's GPS or cell records, to then launder the evidence, a practice known as parallel construction. In the Arkansas nurse's case, an official admitted Fog was used to identify a suspect, a farmer who had murdered a jogger, where they had no leads whatsoever, but acknowledged that Fog's use, quote, was not documented in court records. This makes it perfectly clear that when cops take this information from Fog and they go to the judge, they many times are not telling the judge they're using this data to substantiate their reason for a warrant. And as a result, if it's not in that information, guess who else never finds out? The person that ends up being charged with the crime. Now look, from a police perspective, I get it. You're a cash-strapped police department. Maybe you don't have the full resources. You look over at Fog Data Science and what do you see? You see this tech savior who's able to provide you quick and immediate information, and now you don't have to worry about trying to go through the normal processes or trying to go and obtain a warrant, and it helps you save on your budget. As Bennett Cyphers of EFF described it, and I quote, "Counties with less than 100,000 people have this extremely high-tech, extremely invasive, secretive surveillance tool to chase down local crime." The company then gives out free trials and ride-alongs. Then they have a few small little stories of success, and then you have police departments like the Dallas PD who then sign up for the license, and now it's being used in that city. You say, but Jeff, maybe this is all worth it, using this type of technology if we're tracking down burglars and murderers. The problem is, sometimes it's being used for political reasons. Remember January 6, 2021 at the Capitol riot? Authorities admitted to using geofence warrants on Google to identify many of the suspects in the Capitol breach. But FogReveal's data was also used to trace at least one potential participant's movements, according to an AP investigation. Now, the idea to me that a private company can be used by the police to track protesters at an event is a bit chilling. Today, maybe it's going to be used against only those that the general public sees as dangerous. But tomorrow, it could be used for any purpose, for any political reason at a mass gathering. And perhaps one of the most bizarre examples of fog data being used was when it's being used to spy on a Tesla factory. A savvy investor reportedly used a location data service similar to Fog to spy on employees at a Tesla factory. And based upon their workload and the increase in production, he made lucrative stock trades before Tesla's official earnings reports. Essentially, this guy turned a phone tracking into a source of insider-like information, and he profited off of the data most people had no idea they were giving away. So why do I share this? Because the same data that FogReveal allows cops to tap into is available to anyone else out there that's got a checkbook. Oh, and to cover all this up, Fog claims that all of the information they gather doesn't actually identify a single person. But then they turn around in the same breath and admit if cops need additional information, they can reveal more to expressly provide an identity. In emails gathered by AP News, Fog staff sometimes would hand over home addresses associated with the device's movements, basically doing the de-anonymization for the officers themselves. So don't be fooled. This is personal data, and this personal data that identifies you specifically is being handed out to cops or anyone else who's willing to pay for it. So we now know about Fog Data Science. We know what they're doing, we know they're sharing it with the cops, and we know how the technology works. But is it legal under the Fourth Amendment? The Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution protects, and I quote, "the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures," and requires probable cause plus a warrant for a governmental search. In simple terms, cops need a good legal reason plus a judge's approval before they start searching you or surveilling you. The FogReveal scenario actually paints a picture of two primary issues we have to determine under the Constitution. Number one, is it a, quote, search in the constitutional sense when police use a service like Fog to obtain your historical location data without a warrant? In other words, do you have a reasonable expectation of privacy regarding your phone being at a certain place at a certain time if that data is being collected by a private company? Then number two, if it is defined as a search, is a search warrant actually required? And the big issue that happens here is, can police just ignore the whole warrant requirement if they just go buy the data with taxpayer money? Now, the best case that gives us guidance on this is Carpenter versus United States. Now, this case involved the FBI attempting to obtain cell phone location data. And in the process of doing so, the government argued they could do this by getting it from a private company under what was known as the third-party doctrine. The third-party doctrine basically says that the government believes, including cops, that there's nothing wrong with gathering your personal data from someone else as long as you voluntarily shared it with a private company. But in Carpenter versus United States, the Supreme Court drew a line here and said that cell phone location data is different than some other type of data that could be obtained from a private company. Chief Justice Roberts, writing for the majority, said, and I quote, "There is a legitimate expectation of privacy in the record of physical movements captured through a person's cell phone." He then went on to say that tracking a person's movement through cell signals was an invasion of their expectation of privacy. As a result, collecting long-term cell phone location history is considered a search, and an actual search warrant signed by a judge is required in order for it to be legal. But wait, how does this Carpenter decision apply to FogReveal and all this geofencing? On one hand, Fog's data is even more invasive and more revealing than cell phone tower history. Carpenter dealt with rough cell tower triangulations, but Fog reveals data actually comes from GPS-enabled apps and Wi-Fi signals, often pinpointing devices within a few meters or even within a particular building. One academic note observed that geofence data from Google is more precise than either CSLI or GPS tracking data. Fog's data is also highly precise, retrospective, and pervasive. All the same factors that the court and Carpenter were looking for when they ruled that case to be unconstitutional. From this perspective, it seems clear to me that Fog's data being used by the cops should require a warrant and is a violation of our Fourth Amendment. However, other people see it differently. Cops and prosecutors claim that Carpenter's decision doesn't apply to Fog Reveals technology for a specific set of distinctions. Number one, Fog data comes from voluntary app usage and supposedly opt-in data collection, unlike cell towers that log you just for having a phone. And two, Fog Reveal is the police purchasing data from a private company, rather than compelling a phone company to hand it over. The cops basically claim that the old third-party doctrine applies in this context, essentially that because you consented to using an app on your phone and enabling the location, you can't complain if that data is later used by the police in whatever way they want. In fact, in a recent case, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, they agreed with the cops. The court held that accessing a limited set of geofence location records from Google did not constitute a Fourth Amendment search because users had opted in to the location services and Google's terms notified users that the data could be shared with other people. However, we have a split decision here because that Fourth Circuit case of U.S. versus Chattree is actually in direct conflict with a Fifth Circuit case known as United States versus Smith. In this blockbuster opinion, in United States versus Smith, the Fifth Circuit ruled, and this was a huge win for privacy advocates, they ruled that all geofence searches are unconstitutional on their face and those warrants should not be allowed. Why did they rule this way? Well, number one, they said any access to an individual's location records should be considered a search. It doesn't matter how small or how narrow the time frame is, the court said specifically this is a violation of someone's reasonable expectation of privacy. And then number two, the Fifth Circuit said very specifically here that geofence warrants are, quote, too broad to ever be particular. The Fifth Circuit basically said that geofence warrants were, quote, general warrants, which is exactly the thing that our founders wrote in the Constitution should be forbidden. The problem with all of this, when you have a split decision in two different circuits, if the United States Supreme Court doesn't take up this issue, we don't have any clarity about what can happen here. And in the meantime, Fog data is still going to be used by cops to violate our rights. You may say, Jeff, I don't like the sound of this. This could take a decade for the Supreme Court to address this issue. What do I do in the meantime? Now is the part where I'm going to lay out the specific steps you can take, practical advice to make sure you are not tracked by this technology so that you can maintain your privacy rights. Step number one, limit location permissions. Go through your smartphone apps and prune out the apps that have location access. Many apps request location data unnecessarily. For each app, ask yourself, does this really need my location data to function? If not, turn it off. For apps that do need your location, like maybe maps or ride sharing, use the setting, quote, only while using app, end quote, instead of allowing background access. This prevents the constant pinging of your GPS in the background. Remember, Fog's data relies heavily on apps that have background location permissions. If you restrict your background tracking, you'll only show up every once in a while. You won't be tracked like breadcrumbs. Number two, always purge or avoid suspicious apps. I hate to say this, but some apps are notorious for selling your data. For example, in the past, weather apps, coupon apps, and even apps like Starbucks and Waze have been implicated in this process. You should check to see if an app's privacy policy mentions sharing data with, quote, partners or, quote, third-party advertisers. If it's a free app that asks for your location and is supported by apps, you can almost guarantee that your data is being sold and shared with other people. The more apps you have with location access, the higher the probability that Fog is already tracking you. A 2018 report indicated that over 1,000 apps were harvesting location for profit, including seemingly benign ones, even flashlight apps. So be especially wary of apps from smaller developers that aggressively seek your location permissions. They may be fronts for data brokers. Step number three, disable or reset your advertising ID. Both iOS and Android devices have a unique advertiser identifier used to track you across apps. Android's ad ID can be reset in your settings, And of recent versions, you can also turn it off so that it returns a string of zeros. Apple's IDFA can be effectively turned off by enabling, quote, limit ad tracking, end quote, or on newer iOS devices, simply deny apps permission to track. If an app can't get your IDFA, it's harder, if not impossible, for a data broker to actually track you. Which brings me to number 4, use a privacy-focused phone and operating system. One popular mention is a Brax phone or other similar type of phone, because these phones can be configured to have no advertising ID at all, meaning all apps cannot report a consistent identifier to a tracker. Which brings me to number 5, turn off your location when it's not needed. This one's simple, but you're probably not doing it. Toggle off your GPS location services on your phone. Also, be careful with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Phones can sometimes be located through Wi-Fi networks or Bluetooth beacons, even if your GPS is off. In fact, this is exactly how Apple's, quote, Find My network works via Bluetooth. And if you really want to go stealth and you don't want to be tracked at all, use a Faraday bag or an RF shield whenever you're out with your phone. And finally, number 6, stay informed and support reforms. There's one particular piece of legislation that's already passed the House, but it's been just sitting there languishing in the Senate, which is the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act. This is a great piece of legislation because it will limit the ability of these third-party companies to be able to work with cops to basically create mass surveillance. Oh, and make sure you look into seeing whether your local police department is interested in using and signing up for a license with Fog Reveal data. If they are, one of the best things you can do is to put public pressure on that police department and make it something out there where they have to answer for if they're going to want to surveil their own people. As we continue to move to this Orwellian creep of a surveillance state, it's important that each and every one of us stand up and not only protect ourselves individually with the practical advice I provided you, but also begin to support legislation and pressure our Supreme Court to finally resolve this issue once and for all. Speaking of surveillance state, did you know that cops are not just using fog data science, they're also using and getting in bed with another company to check out your license plate. Not only your license plate, but not only where you've been, but where you have been. Here we go again. Check out this next video where I break down how cops are using your license plate data and what you can do about it. See you over there.